Good evening, and welcome to Soluble. Today is February the 1st in the year of our Lord 2023. We're going to talk on the subject of political accountability tonight on this first day of February. Now, in the past, last year, and for a good while here, we've encouraged people to get out and vote. Encourage people to join the process, trying to inform our Democratic base, most notably the 93, 94 percentile of African Americans that vote Democrat, trying to keep them informed, trying to encourage them to come into the political process, if you will, to make a difference, to make a tooth and nail difference, because we can't ignore this fight. We can't walk away from this fight. It shouldn't be a fight, first and foremost. It shouldn't be a fight. It should be a process. But it becomes a fight, somewhat of a struggle because of misinformation, voter discontent. And in one of the previous podcasts here on last week, I was informed by one of my customers from the daily operations that we run. I was informed by one of my customers who I encouraged to get involved. Why don't you get involved? Because when I see a bright mind, especially of African American males and females, I encourage them to, join in the process in order to advance us as a country, first of all, well, as a people, first of all, and then as a country second, because we struggle, we go through it. Oftentimes, when there's a negative impact on America, it's even more negative in Black and brown communities all across America. So, in talking to this fellow American to encourage him to get involved, then, it really hit me like a ton of bricks, being informed of the corruption that we are having to deal with in our everyday democratic process. And we're talking about corrupt Negro politicians in particular, because it was really an awakening moment for me to learn the extent of the corruption that we are dealing with in the Black community. Now, as I said, you would think that here's a person of color running for office to make a difference for other people of color, because, as I've said, we don't come from a long lineage of massive inherited wealth, lineages of estates being left to us and wealth just handed to us, from one generation to the next. We don't have that, and why we don't begrudge the next person for having it. This is where we're trying to get, and you would think that because we don't have it, that these politicians that step up, people of color that looks like us, would be accountable, would take responsibility in advancing the people. I mean, after all, that's what they've taken the oath. They've raised their right hand, and this is what they're taking the oath to do. So, in learning the degree and the depth at which this runs, as far as corrupt Negro politicians, we here at Soluble, we felt like we need to take a step back. You've heard us talk about Republicans across the aisle, what Republicans are doing, how disruptive they are for the country, how bad they are for the country. We went back into the history of conservative versus Democrat, conservative versus liberal, Democrat versus Republican. We took you back to the time before the Dixiecrats, at the time when the Dixiecrats switched up parties, and how they became flip-flop from then to now. But in pointing all that out, we failed to realize, until we met this brother last week, we failed to realize that we need to get the mote out of our own eye first, as a people and as a party, but as a people first. And it's sad and it's shocking that we would put people of color in positions of power to make change for our neighborhoods. And they go up on Capitol Hill, they go to DC. It could be local, state, or federal, and they're getting caught with their hand in the cookie jar. The cookie jar of corruption, bribery, racketeering, conspiracy. And it hurts not only their credibility, but it hurts the community, because the community is already down, looking for a way out, looking for a hand up, not a handout, but a hand up. And we have politicians who are running, they're campaigning, they're coming into the neighborhoods, and they're campaigning, and they're talking to people that look like me and you, people of color in America. And we have to start there. We would be remiss if we didn't start to clean up our own house first, to get the moat out of our own eye first. Because, we don't want to look foolish here in our quest for equality in America as people of color. We don't want to look foolish. And nothing will make us look more foolish than if we have our politicians who are indulging in corruption, dabbling in corruption, being, threatened with federal probes or having the feds look into them any kind of way. We don't want to make the mistake of having, these politicians to convince us with finger pointing across the aisle to say, you see those prejudiced Republicans, they're making it hard for you. And they're making it hard for you to get on an equal footing in America. When in fact, it may just be the fact that we have corrupt politicians. And whereas we have, racist Republicans who want to set people of color back in this country, and it's bad. What's worse, and I repeat, what's worse would be to have corrupt Negro politicians who are robbing the neighborhoods in which they have been sworn to serve. If there's loan money coming through the federal government, through state governments for the communities, and it's not being dispersed properly. If there are fundraisers that are being given, by stars that may be free concerts or what have you. And all these proceeds should be going to the schools, the communities in whatever shape, form, or fashion, and it's not going there. So we don't want to, get caught, being foolish as Democrats, as that 90-something percentile people of color that vote Democrat. We want to make sure that we're not pointing the finger when we haven't cleaned up our own house. And this is going to call for a new generation of political thinking. It could be, not all of our African American politicians are corrupt. And we don't mean to paint them with the same broad brush. But there's a lot of it going on. And we have to clean it up. For those who are discouraged, who thinks that voting is just a waste of time, and you may have already known, or you may already know about these corrupt politicians and what's been going on for a long time. We here at Soluble, we're pledging to try to put forth a new age of doing things, a new age and way of approaching. Now, let's make it clear. Here at Soluble, we have no political aspirations, none whatsoever. What we hope to bring forth in the age of post-Trumpism, to make sure it never happens again, what we propose is to bring forth a solution, showing you a pathway out. We want the vote over the protest. We want to vote first, hard, in large numbers, in droves, in throngs. Get our turnout out, and get the leaders that we want in office. And then, if we went to the polls in the numbers that we should have, the large turnout, and we don't get the just result, it is what it is. We would have to let the chips fall where they may. But we have to try to push that number, that turnout, up as high and as far as we can. turning out to vote. And that's where we're at here at Soluble, to try to put the breadcrumbs there, if you will, that will lead you to knowledge is power when it comes to what role you can play in politics to make your everyday lives better. And at the end of the day, we get the turnout up, and we go out and vote in large numbers. And if there's a stumbling block put in the way, then we start to go to the protest. Then we start to go to the right to assemble for a peaceable protest. Then and only then, because as I've said, the protest gets you nowhere. The protest gets you nowhere. And after January the 6th of 2021, if you're a person of color in this country and you're a part of the Democratic, if you're a part of the Democratic voting bloc, then you have had to have seen on January the 6th of 2021 where your true power lies. Because you never see Republicans, conservatives, you never see them get riled up to the level that you've seen on January the 6th from you protesting, from you marching. So this has to tell people of color in America that voting is where your true power lies. If you want a true beginning to the end of inequality, racism, anything that makes you feel as if your life is inferior to the next American citizen, you're going to have to go out and vote. This is the game that we want to be in. This is the game. This is the big game. Because, unlike a sport, that involves a ball and points scored to determine a winner, this game, the political process game, if you will, is what goes on in determining how your life is governed, the conditions under which you live in. And if you submit, and if you give it up, if you abandon it, then there's no room for complaining. And I've stated that before. Serial complainers, you could tell the ones that don't vote when it comes to people of color, the ones that don't get involved in the process. Those are the serial complainers. And they're always talking about what they are doing, what they doing. They building this. They get ready to stop that. And who is that they? That's the question for the non-voter. Because with people who are going out to the polls and voting and getting involved in the process, we have no time to consider what they are doing, because we're too concerned with what we're doing and the coalition and the base that we're trying to build. So, as I said, no political aspirations here at Soluble, no desire to run for office on any level, local, state, or federal. We're here to try to inform and rev up the Democratic base, and get you ready and keep you ready from one election cycle to the next, pointing out the daily happenings, the daily goings-ons in Washington, D.C. when it comes to the political parties that be. As I said, nothing, with that being said, nothing is more important than political accountability. And if we don't have accountability, then we're going to suppress our numbers. We're going to deflate our numbers, because it's going to be discouraging when we have people who want to get involved and that we're encouraging to get involved with the process. When they see these corrupt things and they know that politicians are doing, especially politicians who are people of color, Negro politicians, when they see this, it's very discouraging. So we want to let all our listeners know we're aware of it now, unlike at any other time when we started this podcast on last year. We're aware of it now, and we're going to attack it. We're gonna call it to the forefront, just as much as we would a racist Republican or a Republican on the other side of the aisle that's trying to set us back as a people 20 to 50 years. We're gonna have to call it out. Well, we're gonna have to be even more zealous. Excuse me. Excuse me. We're gonna have to be more zealous. We're gonna have to fight this fire with more intensity than we would pointing the finger across the aisle at Republicans. Because as I said, what they're doing is bad. What the Republicans are doing is bad, especially the rogue right, the far right. It's bad. But we have these politicians. Some make up the Congressional Black Caucus. Some have been in Washington, D.C. for years. And they're doing underhanded things with a salary, with a livable wage. With a livable wage. And this is one of the things that should be infuriating, especially to, that Democratic bloc that are the people of color. And when I said before, we're voting in the low 90-something percentile in any given election cycle. Now, that doesn't go to say that, our turnout is 90-something percent. That just reflects the voter registration of people of color in this country. Why are we not getting what we want? Why are we having to still struggle so hard? We're going to have to call it out. We're going to have to call a spade here. We're going to have to name names. We can't afford to be passive. We can no longer afford to be passive. We're coming to the final curtain call here. And so, we're going to name names, and we're going to demand action. We're going to demand change. And we here at Soluble, and you at home, or you out there that's listening, the power that you have in America, the power that you have through rights, and that are guaranteed to you in the Constitution. You have to use them to the fullest extent. You have to use them to the fullest effect. And this is not time for the weak. This is not no time for the weary. It's time to get even stronger now and even more determined, especially when we here at Soluble are willing to call it out. We're willing to call it out for what it is. And as I said, we're going to go at it even harder. Corrupt Negro politicians. We need a change. We need fresh leadership. And, if any time it arises its ugly head, especially in those politicians, those Democratic politicians who are part of the 90-something percentile, African American, we have to call it out, or we're doomed. And as I say, it's worse than the racist Republican, because these are the people of our own political affiliation. These are the people who, as I said, they campaign from year to year, from time to time in any given election cycle, coming into the neighborhoods, and they're telling us that they feel our pain. They're going up to make a difference. And we should expect them to be squeaky clean, crystal clean. No matter what other politicians are doing, of any other racial stripe. Because and we can't compare ourselves there, because these other politicians of other racial stripes, they're not going through the things that we're going through as a voting bloc, people of color. They're not going through the same things. So this is the reason why we can no longer afford to be passive. And we must get the mote out of our own eye before we begin to point fingers across the aisle. We have to clean up our own act, because it's like the power is there, but the people that we're sending up to represent us, to help us to harness that power, so that we can have some kind of tangible feeling of what it's like to have that kind of power represented in our neighborhood. They're not doing their jobs. They're not doing their jobs, and this is a disgrace. And the only way we're going to get rid of it and move past it is to call it like it is on its face. Don't get discouraged. Keep the same fire. Keep the same energy. We can't afford to let one crooked politician that comes along discourage us, knock us off of our game. Listen, if we're voting in the 90-something percentile, people of color, and we're still going through changes that we feel as if, we shouldn't be going through, then it's on us. We can't wait for Republicans to do it for us. We can't wait for people of our own party affiliation who might be of another racial demographic. We can't wait. We as people of color in this 90-something percentile, we have to push our agenda more than ever. We have to stand up like grown men and women and push our agenda. And use all the powers that be that are afforded to us as Americans to level this playing field and to bring equality, racial harmony, equal financial opportunities into our neighborhoods, into our areas. But it starts with us. It starts with us as a people of color. We have to be accountable. And that's where we're going tonight. That's what we're talking about, political accountability. Now, just to name a few names, crooked Negro politicians that we have to move past, get fresh leadership in, and then hold them accountable to the fullest extent that we can. As much as we know about it, call them out, shame them, vote them out, whatever we have to do. Because, we're striving for something higher. And we may be, close to the mountaintop, slipping back down more because of corrupt Negro politicians than racist Republicans. Those are just the facts. Now, crooked Negro politicians, we named a few last week in our first part of this, podcast when we found out about it. Just a few more to add to the list. Kwame Kilpatrick out of Michigan. Jesse Jackson Jr. out of Illinois. Shaka Fatah, if I'm not mistaken, he's out of Maryland. Now, these last few, we're not sure where their states or districts are at. Eddie Bernice Johnson, Al C. Hastings, Charlie Rangel, Ray Nagin, after Hurricane Katrina, Michael Brown, son of another politician, Ron Brown. I think, he's resting in peace now. But these, this is just a short list of corrupt Negro politicians who have come into the neighborhood and campaigned and told us to our face that they would go to DC or go to Tallahassee, wherever they may be, local, state, or federal, and make a difference for us. So, the question and the answer is simple. How can we get to that promised land that we're striving for if the people that we're sending up are crooked? If they're corrupt, if they're not doing things on the up and up. And hint, hint, this is probably a good reason why we're not there yet. Because they want to go up and they campaign, they win, they raise their right hand. And then they're getting caught up in bribes, backroom deals, conspiracies, skimming off the top. How can you make a difference in my life, in my neighborhood? How can you make life in America better for me as a person of color if you're under federal indictment? Or if you're headed to prison? Or if you're having to resign because you've been caught with your hand in the cookie jar of corruption? There's no way. And so this is one of the main reasons why we as Democrats and that 90-something percentile people of color that vote there, this is why we're still lacking. This is why, we've come a long ways. Excuse me. This is why we've come a long way and we still have a long way to go. Because these leaders that are doing these crooked things, it's discouraging to the average everyday American, especially of African American descent, that we're trying to convince to register and show up at the polls and vote. So to all our listeners out there, we're striving here at Soluble to make that difference. We pledge to fight the good fight, to keep you informed of all the crookedness, the shadiness, corruption. We're trying to be a magnet for information, valid information, facts. And we encourage you to keep the faith keep the fire burning hot. You know, we can't, if we let these corrupt Negro politicians discourage us, it's going to set us back. We have to move them out the way and keep going with forward progress. And keep going with forward progress. Now, this is going to be the first step in taking accountability for your political actions. And you know, it could be very much the case that the struggle continues because we don't participate enough. Now we know all about, you know, the Democrats we have now, you know, President Biden, President Harris, Vice President Harris. President Biden, you know, he signed off on the crime bill, the 1992, I think, if I'm not mistaken, crime bill that sent a lot of us to prison in waves. We called it to his attention this past election cycle in November of 2020. It was brought up in the debates. And the president showed a willingness to admit he was wrong. He did something that, you know, at the time seemed right, but now looking back in hindsight, and we all know hindsight is 2020. But he seems to be, and this is where we have to keep our foot on the gas to make sure, because seems to be is not going to be acceptable. It's not going to be good enough for us. So we here at Soluble, we need help. As I said, no political aspirations, but we're bringing you the facts. Now it seems as I was saying that the president is contrite, and you know he's willing to amend his ways and take a look at it and admit that he's wrong, and you know take a different approach. That says a lot. Can we get that out of a Republican? Can we get any Republican to acknowledge that some type of legislation that was passed here in the past, and it affected people of color, you know, more than it did the average Americans? Disparities in sentences between crack cocaine and powder cocaine, for instance. But the current president, back to my point, has admitted that he was wrong in hindsight. What he thought was good was actually a terrible idea. It takes a lot, it takes a big person to do that, to acknowledge that they were wrong. And, you know, they're going to work to try to get it right. Vice President Kamala Harris, she was the DA or something like that over in California, you know, sending people to prison for marijuana. It's well documented. Once again, you know, if these political leaders can admit up to what they've done, the mistakes that they've made, acknowledge them and do better, and get in office and do what it takes to reverse the trend, do what it takes to actually get hand-on solutions, you know, versus mass incarceration of people, then, you know, that's a good start for us as Democrats. That's a great start. As I said, have the Republicans, have we gained any traction from the right as far as admitting a wrongdoing or looking at some legislation and saying to themselves, you know, this is kind of backward, this is wrong, this says, you know, abnormally affected people of color, and we have to change this because while on its face it may look good, you know, it really is a very biased law and a one-sided law. If we can get them to admit that, Republicans that is, that's a good thing. So, you know, with the president and vice president, we have something to start on, you know, in bringing up, for example, the things that we want to see done different with our Democratic leaders and in the Democratic Party. No to entitlements, no to mass incarceration, and you know, fairness in sentencing laws. You know, this is just one small drop, and I'm using that as an example to say that yes, the Democrats don't always get it right. They don't always get it right. We have our reasons for, you know, maybe not trusting or becoming discouraged or thinking that, you know, we're voting, but it doesn't seem like it's changing anything. You have a point. You have a point. And, you know, first and foremost, here at Soluble, we are aware. And, you know, if there's anyone that's listening that begs to differ, you know, we welcome different viewpoints. We welcome comments. I spoke to you a couple weeks ago about getting, the invite window open so we can do, interviews or have people to come on and give us their opinion. We haven't got there yet, but we welcome all opposing views because at the end of the day, we're looking for a solution here. We're not looking to, you know, talk to no end, or just be an echo chamber to nowhere. We're looking for a solution, on the ground, viable solution that we can really sink our teeth into. And so, the first thing that we can do as being accountable is to hold our corrupt politicians accountable. That's the first thing we can do to have accountability. The very first thing. And, I'm talking to the Democratic Party, but that 90 something percentile in particular, you're voting in a high number here. Think about it. Think about it. You pretty much when you got 90 something percent of something, whatever it is, it usually goes that way. It usually gets what it wants. If you have, 90 something percent of ingredients in, say, a bag of chips, if the 90 something percent of the ingredients are barbecue, then they're not going to taste plain. They're not going to taste like cheddar or sour cream. They're going to always be barbecue. So if you got 90 something percentile in your vote, registered as Democrats, you should be pretty well off in America as far as a level playing field, jobs, community improvements, low crime in your communities. So, we all know what the situation is. We just watched something horrific happen here a couple weeks ago in Memphis. So, we all know that we're not there yet. But the question on how we get there, number one, I had to rewind it back. And as I said, stop doing so much finger pointing across the aisle at Republicans, because we have a mote in our eye here. We have a mote in our own eye. And there's no way we can point the finger at Republicans and tell them to get the mote out of their eye. We don't want to look foolish. We don't want to look foolish as a voting bloc, as a party, as a people. We don't want to look foolish, and we want results. That's what we want more than anything, results. So how do we get those results without looking foolish? We have to deal with Negro politicians in this country, in whatever city, state, district they may be in. They have to go. They have to clean up their act. And we're the ones who are going to have to demand it. Our fellow Democrats who are of other racial stripes, they're not going to push for this. They're not going to demand this. And believe it or not, we're looking foolish when we're pointing our finger across the aisle at Republicans, and we may be persuaded to do it by the corrupt politicians who are worse than Republicans. It may be some of these politicians who I've just named, or some that look just like them, saying, there's your number one problem there, the Republicans. No, ladies and gentlemen, I beg to differ. Our number one problem in the Democratic Party, one, two, with the 90-something percentile people of color that's voting in this party, our number one problem is we have to clean up these corrupt Negro politicians, because it doesn't come back to the neighborhood. And when it doesn't come back, here's what you're stuck with. You're stuck with the same neighborhood, the same results, nothing changes. Now you have a corrupt politician who's under federal indictment. They may be on their way to jail. They may be already in jail. They're in the act of resigning. So there's your progress there. Tied up in a federal indictment, tied up in resignation. And when they resign, that gives the Republicans, room to pounce then to say, see, there's a Democratic politician right there that said this and says that, and look how corrupt they are. Then our numbers go down. then our numbers are subject to go down because we don't see results. And then we're sick and tired of being sick and tired. We got to get back up on this horse again. Well, here's the opportunity right here now, ladies and gentlemen, presented to you by Soluble, where you can get on and stay on. And you don't have to keep getting knocked off of this horse. But to get on and stay on it and have a smooth ride, we have to hold our politicians accountable. Whatever they say they're going to do, starting now, starting in the year of our Lord 2023, we have to get active, all of us. We have to push the agenda. We owe it. We owe it to those on the other side who have perished in America unjustly, who have perished in America simply because of the color of their skin. We owe it to them. Those of us here in the land of the living. Are we prepared to tell our leaders of yesteryear, Dr. King, Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, Booker T. Washington, are we prepared to tell our leaders of the past that their work was all in vain? And it's no time for finger pointing one to the other to say, some of the names you just named, they were just as crooked as some of these politicians that you're naming off now. Some of these politicians from yesteryear are just as crooked as the ones you're naming off now. We're here at Soluble, two wrongs never make a right. And I'm quite sure that a lot of us was raised up with that same advice, with that same knowledge. Two wrongs don't make a right. And, for us to get caught up in the finger pointing gets us nowhere. Because at the end of the day, it's not about, who's corrupt today and who was corrupt yesterday. The question is, what are we going to do about it for the sake of our daily lives now in the present and in the future for our children and grandchildren? What are we going to do about it? That's the question. Do you have the fortitude? Do you have the willingness and determination to make this change? To call it out where you see it? Because if we're going to say, without getting the mote out of our own eye, without looking at corrupt Negro politicians, if we're going to say that our problem solely exists across the aisle in the form of any person with an R behind their name, then we're wrong. We're going to lose. Because that's not the right approach. That's not the right way to thinking that puts us in a position to win. We have to start here. I know you've probably heard this song or the saying, sweep around your own front door. That's where we're at here, ladies and gentlemen. We have to sweep around our own front door. There's no way that we can afford to have, politicians, especially people of color, who have come into the neighborhoods and sworn to make a difference. And then we just turn a blind eye while, they're doing corruptible things. They're committing all kind of crime, underhanded, shady tactics. We can't, if we stand idly by and let it happen, then we're losing. And then to look across at Republicans and say, you're the reason why this is happening. You're the main reason. We're wrong. We're not going to say that Republicans don't shoulder any blame. That's not the position here. We would be foolish to think that. But first and foremost, it's politicians of the Democratic stripe in the Democratic Party that we have to start with. We have to hold them accountable. Politically accountable. Political accountability. That's where we're at. And it's not for the faint and weak of heart. It's not. Political accountability. Accountable being a willingness, after all is said and done, to answer for the outcomes of your choices, actions, and behaviors. And that's where we're at. We have to hold these politicians to an account. And if they don't clean up the act, we have the power to vote them out. But the power is useless if we don't use it. Grumbling, complaining, giving in. We have to fight the good fight. And if we go all in, we will win. and we will win every time. And then that's the end of the uphill battle. That's the end of the uphill battle. If we could just, grasp that and make it a part of our everyday lives. Now we're asking for political accountability, especially from politicians who are people of color. We're asking for accountability. We're asking for you to clean up your act, change your ways. You know what's at stake. You've been known what's at stake. You signed up for a livable wage. You raise your right hand on a Bible. You pledge to do something. You have a livable wage. How are we getting caught up in bribes, conspiracies, winding up on the federal indictment, having to resign, we're behind bars, in disgrace? Number one is greed. But I'm going to go back one more time and refresh as far as political accountability, because it's real important. Because if we don't grasp accountability, then, you can say what you want to say. You can complain as loud as you want to complain. You can go out and vote like we have been doing, and change is coming all too slow. We may see a glimmer of it on our deathbed. And a glimmer is nothing. A glimmer is not the whole picture. It's almost like just a blink. But once again, political accountability. That's where we're at. Accountable being, a willingness. So you have to be willing. You have to be willing. This is not for the faint and the weak of heart. A willingness, after all is said and done, to answer for the outcomes of your choices, actions, and behaviors. Now watch this and how beautiful this is, and how it's going to work if we would just all be accountable. When you're personally accountable, you stop assigning blame, shooting on people, and making excuses. Instead, you take the fall when your choices cause problems. That's it in a nutshell. You take responsibility. You take the fall when your choices cause problems. Now, we're adults here. We're all of voting age adults. So this should be a no-brainer. This should be a no-brainer. Children, we don't expect them to be accountable or to take, to be responsible. It's in a child's nature to make an excuse up, maybe try to fib their way out of it, or deny that they did it. They don't want to take accountability, and it's understandable because a lot of times they don't want, there are unpleasant consequences that come with taking accountability. So we can expect it from a child, and then teach them to do better. But here we have grown-ups. We have grown people who are people of color with political aspirations. They're running for office. They're winning said office. They're sitting in said seat. So why does it seem as if, progress is coming so slow for those Democratic voters in America in that 90-something percentile? Now, we're going to encourage you to keep rocking the vote. We're going to encourage you to keep rocking the vote. But at the same time, and, it may seem like a lot, but, once you start a trend, you could set that trend and it never has to change again. That trend is set, could stay there permanently. But it's going to be up to us, we the people. We the people. And, we can't state it enough. This is a process that we all too often don't get involved in enough, as much as we should. And there's a lot of things, I'm not going to go into detail or start listing things off that we participate in as people of color, as African Americans in this country on an annual basis. Holidays, it's like I said, sporting events, movie releases, new designer sneakers that are coming out. We stand in line for these things. We participate in them wholeheartedly. We're neck deep into the internet, just as all other Americans are. But when it comes to governing, which has to do with our daily lives, there's a political process out there that determines how you're governed, if you're governed at all, how effectively you're governed, taken care of in your neighborhood, having the taxpayer dollars being spent to your benefit in your neighborhoods. We're governed, and to not participate in with as an equal enthusiasm as you would any of these other things that I've just named off that happen annually in this country is the major reason why we're still fighting this uphill battle. So we want political accountability, and we want voter turnout, and accountability is going to involve possibly somewhat cleaning house. Cleaning house what? Where? With these corrupt politicians. Surely we got them in. Surely we can get them out. But we can't be no ways tired. And then once we send that message as a new free thinking Democratic voter, once we send that message that corrupt politicians will not be tolerated, then trust me, just like January 2021 began to bring on a new change, a new type of leadership, and Trumpism was going out the door, this is what will begin to happen in forms of equality, more improvements in your neighborhood, better policing. Lord knows we need it. But you will see all the things that have brought you despair or that have kept you disgruntled that other Americans don't have to deal with or have to endure. You will begin to see those things go away and not be so anymore. But it's only one way for that to happen. And two things you have to do. We have to be politically accountable. Excuse me. Part of that is getting rid of corrupt Negro politicians. And then we have to have our turnout every time. Without that, you're always going to be disgruntled. You're going to be struggling. You're going to be behind the eight ball, so to speak. And so, we're at a critical juncture now. We have to start thinking in political terms, as far as a Democratic voting bloc, a Democratic Party, and that 90-something percentile people of color. We have to start looking at it in a way of, kind of like nothing ventured, nothing gained. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. So, if we look at ourselves as a party, as a race, and we look at our community and we see that, there's little to nothing gained, then you have to ask yourself, what is ventured? What is ventured? Have I ventured out to vote every election cycle? Have I ventured my time to go and campaign, to get involved? Have I ventured my time to pick up the phone or a pen to write or call my elected officials, to let them know how unhappy I am with any said given thing that's going on in my neighborhood or around me or in the country, period? So that's where we're at. We're at a stage where it's always been that way, but we have to look at it. As I said, nothing ventured, nothing gained. It's just that simple. So, we're going to either venture and gain, or we're not going to venture. And then we're going to sit there with nothing gained and complain. So, being informative, striving to keep you aware, keep you enthused, keep you engaged in this political process. We're going to bring you all the relevant information. We're going to bring you all the political goings on, which you see yourself. Now, up to this point, our conclusion is that the Democratic Party is the best party for working class America, which involves, the majority of the people of color in this country are working class Americans. And we just believe that based on laws that have been passed, legislation that has been funded, you know, bills that have been passed to bring work, you know, to bring change, new faces on the Supreme Court. We see the Democratic Party as our party of power that gives us a launching platform to launch from. Now, if there's a difference of opinion, that's what we're here for. Let's discuss it. Let's negotiate it. But at the end of the day, after the discussion, after the negotiation, we should have a clear focal point of where we're trying to go in this country and what it's going to take to get there. And you know, we're gonna here at Soluble, we're gonna keep a close eye and ear out for any corrupt doings by all politicians, but especially those of the Democratic stripe, because we want to encourage turnout and we want to encourage, you know, voter registration for the Democratic Party. We want to encourage it to go up. We're looking for new blood constantly to get these numbers up, to keep them up, to, you know, have Democrats in power in Washington, D.C., and Republicans not in power. But we're going to have to be politically accountable, starting with our own. And this is what's going to get turnout up. So as I said, nothing ventured, nothing gained. And that's where we're at, ladies and gentlemen. So don't forget that. If we haven't gained anything, and here we are in the year of our Lord 2023. Think about how long ago it's been when Dr. King sat in the White House with Lyndon B. Johnson around civil rights legislation. Up to now, have we ventured as much as we can venture? If we've taken 2 steps forward and 3 steps back, we have to acknowledge that and we have to fix it. But this is where we are. This is where we are. So, you know, just like any other party, race of people who are just grown up in a country, just grown up with the way they're being governed, we have to venture now. We have to venture something. We're no different than the rest of mankind. And I'm specifically stating this to the 90-something percentile people of color. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. That's where we're at in this critical mass. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Break it down to you, you know, and give you some more simplified meaning for understanding nothing ventured, nothing gained. Some more simplified meaning for us as Democratic voters in that 90-something percentile who won't change, and we want it now. We don't want to wait. We don't want it to pass on 2 or 3 more generations and then fizzle out over time. We want it now. So we're at a nothing ventured, nothing gained state of mind. We're at a nothing ventured, nothing gained type of approach when it comes to politics. And then we begin to immediately see the change when we get involved. But nothing ventured, nothing gained, breaking it down. And this reflects where we're at. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Simple meanings. Take risks to get something good. High stakes. Dare. Stick your neck out. All in. Kamikaze. Up the ante. Take your life into your own hands. This is some of the most simpler meanings wrapped around the phrase nothing ventured, nothing gained. Take risks to get something good. So are we going to venture? It's worth the risk to get something good. It's worth the risk. It's worth the effort. Now, based on the past, American politicians in both parties, they're used to seeing you vote and then go away and let them do what they want to do. Let the chips fall however they may. You have to show them that different change now. We have to take a harder venture. Take risks. As I said, stick your neck out. Kamikaze. All in. Up the ante. Up the ante. Don't lower the ante, up the ante. This is venturing. This is a good venture. And when you do these, if you do these, you're going to gain. You're going to gain. There's no other end result for you when you venture, when you take risks to do something good. You're going to gain something there. That's what the leaders in the past have had to do. They've had to take risks. They've had to venture something. Going out, with high pressure water hoses, billy clubs, attack dogs, racist mobs, crooked cops. But they ventured. And they got us over halfway there. So, it's up to us now. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. But it's up to us to get it over the finish line. The ones who come before us that voted Democratic, that leaned on Democratic leaders, Democratic presidents. As I said, Dr. King sat right there in the White House with Lyndon B. Johnson. He was venturing, a venturing man, and he gained a lot. So if it's good enough for that goose, surely it's good enough for us ganders. And that's where we're at now in the year 2023. It's going to be up to us to take it across the finish line. So our mission here at Soluble is to attack whenever, wherever, whoever, when it comes to corrupt politicians of the Democratic stripe, especially people of color. We're going to hit them. We're going to hit them hard. And we encourage our listeners to do so also. Bring shame on them. Bring the verbal disgrace down around them constantly until, they resign and go away or they change their ways. We would rather have the latter first for them to change their ways and serve the people as you have stated, as you have sworn to do. Serve the people. But if they don't, if they will not, we must call them out because that's a venture. That's a venture. And we know now that if we venture something, then we gain something. If we venture to go out and vote, then, we gained one of the first African Americans on the Supreme Court. We gained the first African American female to hold the vice presidential position. But the work is not over. There's plenty more to do. And the first and foremost thing, when it comes to political accountability, there's no way that, we can consider the fact that we're holding ourselves accountable if we don't call out our crooked politicians. Because as I said, when they're resigning, when they're under federal probe, indictment, they're doing nothing for you and I. They're doing nothing to make the neighborhoods better, safer, more progressive, more financially independent, more financially worthy. They're doing nothing, and we're getting nothing. So we're going to have to start there. We're going to have to press the rewind button and rewind back from across the aisle what Republicans are or aren't doing. And we're going to have to sweep around our own front door here with corrupt Democrat politicians, especially those people of color. And we have to usher it out and usher in a new beginning. It's just that simple. For that 90-something percentile, nobody's going to do it for us. And we have to stand up now more than ever. In closing, having something to do with it, but not totally, in the political sense. We just lost a precious life. A brother senselessly killed. This brother Tyree Nichols, senselessly killed by his own kind, by his own race. What is the level of fear and ignorance there? And what does it say about that level of fear and ignorance? How can this happen in a post-George Floyd world? How could something like this happen where a young, innocent kid of African-American descent is beaten beyond recognition to the point he loses his life by 5 cops who are of his own race. So, intelligence is on call. It's time to venture more than ever. We have to speak for this brother and others just like him who have unjustly perished in America because of racial stereotypes, ignorance, and what we perceive as acceptable to be for a black person, a person of color, to be treated that way in this country. And we never see it. We never see it. Even in cases of resistance, we never see this when it comes to our fellow Caucasian citizens. So it was just ludicrous all the way around the board. And another reason, it's a very clear example of why we need to be more accountable as people of color. There are things that are happening to us in our communities and to us as a race. There are things that are happening that wouldn't be happening if we were more telling ourselves what to do instead of relying on others to govern us or tell us what to do. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. Remember that. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. And it's time to go all in. It's high stakes. And political accountability, the first step in taking political accountability to win, to get Democrats in office, to keep this country moving in a direction that levels the playing field for all Americans, is to hold the corrupt leaders responsible, call them out, and take those active steps that we need to take: voting, becoming engaged through phone calls, letter writing, out campaigning, out protesting, but more than anything, to vote. But we're going to definitely sweep around our own front door first and foremost. We're going to make sure that the Democrats are walking the straight and narrow. That's not to say that we're not going to hold Republicans responsible or hold them to an account when we feel like their legislation is backwards. Or the laws that they want to put on the books or the bills that they're trying to advance set us back. We're going to call it out, with the same equal ferocity. But definitely, most definitely, those of the Democrat stripe. That's the venture. That's the venture that we should take now. First and foremost, to clean house. Because if we don't clean house, then it's going to take longer for us to see the progress. For us to begin to engage in, on that road towards progress and recovery. It's going to be hard. It's going to be somewhat impossible if we don't clean house first. So in political accountability, let's call out corruption anywhere we see it. Let's first and foremost concentrate on our own party. Anything that we see corrupt, anything where we see where politicians are saying one thing and doing another, we have to call it out. And we have to, stay on top of it and be strong. As I said, this is not a mission for the faint and weak of heart. So political accountability, nothing ventured, nothing gained. That's where we're at. And we're on a mission to do what? To keep Democrats in power for the foreseeable future. Because we feel as if, America, for all, not just some, but for all, is better off when it comes to Democratic leadership versus Republican leadership. So that's going to do it for this night's podcast, Political Accountability. We hope that we've been informative, somewhat encouraging for you to engage in the process, get involved, because, it's going to take us all. It's going to, there's strength in unity, and we need it now more than ever because we are some of the most vulnerable. Us, the people of color in this country. But the way out, the way forward to make America a more just place for you to live in and for everybody to live in is to get engaged and get involved in this political struggle, in this political quest for different leadership that we can have in for the foreseeable future. And when we put our leaders in, we want to give them majorities where they don't have to fight and struggle to get bills passed and meaningful legislation through the halls of power so that we can actually see something tangible in our everyday lives. So that's going to do it for tonight. We thank you for joining us. for this podcast having to do with political accountability. Um, we encourage you to get involved and stay involved. And remember, vote first and then let the chips fall where they may if we have to protest. But voting is more powerful than protesting. So we encourage you to get involved. This is Soluble. We thank you for joining us tonight. We look forward to keeping you informed and keep bringing you the facts of the day because, knowledge is power. And that's what we're after. That's our quest here in order to, you know, bring about equality and a more peaceful political process in America. This is Soluble. We thank you for joining us. Until we meet again, God bless and good night. Thank you.